Could I have the book though?
Oh, I'll go and get it. Yes, yes. Hold on a sec.
Do you want to turn off the...
No, it's fine.
It was well done, Danny.
Was it all right?
That was beautiful, yeah. I think The Smoked Ancestor is a very good story. The top of Old Smoky. Do you remember the polices? They called their house Old Smoky, didn't they?
Yes, yes, I do. The one in Edenbridge.
Yes,
that they
that's
were
right.
going
They
to buy. Yes,
called it Old Smoky.
The smoke had been covered. Thank you. I don't really want to...
I'll do that later.
Yes, right, okay. Rosemerrin. Well, this was where I grew up, and it was the house of my aunt. My parents were abroad at the time in Africa, and it was wartime. So instead of living as I had been doing in Kent, which was very much under the fly path of the German bombers and things, I came down to live with my aunt, who lived in West Cornwall, Rosemerrin in Bude, North Cornwall. And there was it was almost an entirely a female householders. My Aunt Tibble, I've got a photograph of her, who lived there and owned the house. There was my second aunt, Tangy, who helped run and cook. She was the great cook. There was Tibble's daughter, Sally. Sally's daughter, Moosey, who's just died, unfortunately. And there was, and me, on holidays from school, Cheltenham, at school, and occasionally my brother, Tony, and my sister, Alison, when they weren't doing what they were doing. Now there came a time, it was, I think in the early 40s, when there was a lot of diseases going around, and I think quite a lot of us were in bed. And a very nice lady called Betty came to look after us all. And she actually was very active in actually making the best of things. And she decided that we would produce a newspaper or gazette. And she found a notebook, a very old one. This is the Rosemerrin Gazette. And in it there's the most lovely poems and things. There's an alphabet about Rosemerrin, and M is for Moosey, our funny little tough. N is for the news, in the middle of the war, of which we never have enough. J is for Janet, who dances best of all.
Oh.
There must have been an L or a K or something before that. But anyway, it was fun making up the alphabet, and there was a story, and there was various other things in this wonderful Rosemerrin Gazette. And it really kept us cheered up, because Moosey was having measles. Sally, her mother, I think was having mumps, or perhaps it was the other way around, I don't remember. I was having whooping cough. So we were an ill family, but all female. But the thing about Rosemerrin was it wasn't just the first Rosemerrin, it was actually the second Rosemerrin, because my aunt Tibble had married in her youth a painter of the Newlyn School, and had gone down to extreme south of Cornwall, where with her husband, Benji Leader, had built a house using, interestingly enough, the stones from a fugu. Fugus only exist in Cornwall and in Ireland, and it's a rather ghostly underground tunnel. They had a wonderful time there, and then First World War broke out. Benji went to the First World War and was killed. Tibble had 2 small children. She wanted to know somewhere where there was a good school that she could educate them, and eventually had to move up to Bude and built the Rosemerrin that I know.
But now, can you say where the first Rosemerrin was? It was in Lamorna Cove.
It was just above Lamorna Cove.
Above Lamorna Cove, and Lamorna Birch was the artist who was of the Newlyn School.
Artist.
He lived in Lamorna Cove as well.
That's where he got his name from. And, yes. and this Rosemerrin was as near as they could get to that. They built it in a...
She built it in 1931, the one in
she built Rosemerrin. My Rosemerrin was in 1931. That's right. Anyway, the wonderful thing about Rosemerrin, I remember absolutely every detail of where all the furniture is, of where the doors were and everything. And I still have one or two things from Rosemerrin. That brass and gong thing was on the table, for example. Some of the pictures, this picture was in the
Yes,
sitting
that
room.
was there.
This table, half moon table, was against the walls. So I remember all of it. And I'm very glad I do, because when I was 14 and I was at school, Tybalt died very, very suddenly. Running down our family is a fault in the brain. We've got a
Aneurysm.
yes, an aneurysm, and her mother died of it. She died of it. A cousin Nat's jolly nearly died of it. Anyway, she was playing bridge, and she collapsed. I was at school, didn't know anything about it. Didn't manage to go to her funeral, but by the time that the term finished, there was no Rosemerrin to come back to, because Tybalt's daughter Sally, mother of Mousy, who had inherited it, had decided that she was married for the second time now, and didn't live there. This is long after the war, obviously. And she sold it very quickly to somebody who'd been eyeing it for ages. A local farmer wanted to buy it.
It was about 1954, wasn't it, Diane? And your father offered.
Yes, no, it was before. I was only 14 now. It must have been 49 or something. Anyway, the day that the sale went through, the telegram arrived from my father, who was in Gambia at that moment, to say, we will buy Rosemerrin. But it was
Too late.
Too late.
late. And it was such a tragedy. Although, in fact, having a house down there, well, the family would have owned it. I mean, not just us, but Alison and Tony and everybody. It was a wonderful family home, all during the war, because cousins. My mother was a great one. She adored all her sisters and her brother, Matthew Anderson, who died in the First World War, along with Benji, leader. But it was a sort of focus point, partly because it was family, partly because it was by the sea, it was in Cornwall, and partly because there was a tremendous family sort of feeling about it. And so cousins came, cousins-in-law came, second cousins came, and there was a constant toing and froing from there. Tybalt was terribly poor. You didn't make much as an artist, and you didn't get very much of a war pension. And so what she used to do before I knew them, when I was still much younger and was living in Kent, was that she would let Rosemerrin during the summer, and then all the family and all cousins that were coming would up sticks and go further down the coast of Cornwall, where there were a couple of old huts.
Constantine Bay, wasn't it?
Yes, near Constantine Bay, and also near Dosbury Pool. And they would live there for, the 2 months of the summer or something, while Rosemerrin was let, and then they would up sticks again and come back. But I don't know how she managed with a huge household during the war, but somehow she did. We had a lot of lentil soup, I remember, which I absolutely loved, and chicken once a month if we were lucky. She was a splendid woman, and a very good artist in her own right.
And where is she buried?
She's buried in Bude churchyard, and I go and visit her when I'm down there, and we're going to be scattering Alison's ashes just down, further down the road, very soon, in about 10 days' time.
Is the reason why Tony then spent the rest of his life in Bude because of his memories of Rosemerrin? There was no link other than that from
that's right.
your father's, from his father's side?
He was my brother was an incredible rebel. He completely disagreed with his father and mother on lots of things, and they kept urging him to actually go and become a proper physician or surgeon.
Famous London surgeon.
Yes, that's right, which he would have been extremely good at. But he absolutely refused. So as soon as he qualified, he came back to Bude, which he knew. He probably felt safe there. And it so happened that actually Dr. Holtby, who was our family doctor, was needing a junior doctor in the practice, and so took him on. And my brother stayed there all his life. He became an absolute fixture. He was a wonderful GP, and he's remembered by generations of Bude people, who most of whom he brought into the world because he was basically a obstetrician and a gynecologist and things.
And why was it important for Alison, and that's where her ashes will be scattered?
Because she remembers she had a very difficult childhood with my parents abroad. When my mother and father were going to difficult parts of the world where there wasn't any medicine, where white children were very much at risk of dying of sort of tropical diseases and things. And when there was only one child, she could leave that particular child, like Alison, with a cousin who was also having children. The trouble was that then when they had more, 2 or 3, that became too much. So Alison's childhood, which she remembers with great sorrow and difficulty, was being sent with Tony, who was a very difficult small boy, to stay in things in those days which were called holiday homes, but they tended to be a couple, an elderly couple, whose children perhaps had grown up and gone away, and they would offer a home in the holidays to other people's children whose parents were abroad. And she remembers day after day sitting, knitting, this was during the war too, knitting things for the troops, and having to keep Tony out of the way, and he was either crying or he was kicking around a ball and smashing things and being in real trouble. And she absolutely hated holidays because that was her lot. By the time I came, I was very lucky because on the whole, my childhood was spent with aunts in the war, later in the war, in Bude, which was extremely happy. I had a pony called Sally, and I used to ride it, and Tibble, poor Tibble, she had what was called, very old-fashioned, a washing green, which where you hang the washing. You didn't hang it out in your garden, of course not. You put it in the washing green. And the pony was sort of shoved into the washing green and kept escaping from there. And when I was at school for the term, of course, their job was to actually keep it there. And one of these terms I came back to find that the pony, unfortunately, had gone back to the stables from which it had been brought by a man who knew I was a friend of my parents, who knew I was absolutely passionate about ponies and had bought it for me, bless him. But it was a real trial to poor Tibble and Danny.
But there's one other thing about Alison and Bude. She and Peter Mulcahy Morgan, her husband, rented a cottage quite regularly called Grace Cottage, not very far from St Michael's Church in Bude. And it was in that cottage that Peter Mulcahy Morgan died of a heart attack in 1984.
That's correct.
And so that's why his ashes were scattered off Barrel Rock.
Well, because also they used to take the family down to Grace Cottage every summer.
Yes.
Alison was as passionate about Bude as I was.
But not to do with Rosemerrin. She didn't stay in Rosemerrin?
Well, this was when she was married and had children.
Yes.
Long after Rosemerrin had gone.
There's a magnetic pool of Bude to
Yes.
all the Andersons and Budds.
And that's right. And actually, I think Peter died in the road, but he was picked up. I mean, Tony, as the doctor in Bude. Alison, I wasn't there. She was somewhere else. I don't know. I think back at home and was either coming down or had just gone back. Anyway, Tony was summoned as the doctor, and he did a lovely thing, because he arrived to see Peter dead, and picked him up and took him to Grace Cottage and laid him out on the lawn there, so that when Alison came, there was Peter. You know, he could tell that it wasn't a crime scene or anything. He just died there. He had diabetes. And so when Alison came, there was Grace Cottage. And I think they both of them probably, as I did, loved the walk from Grace Cottage down the little rutty lane to the breakwater which goes out to the Barrel Rock, where Pete's ashes are scattered, and where she wants hers scattered too.
And we were in Indonesia when he died. We'd just arrived in Indonesia, and I was pretty busy. But Janet came home. She flew home for the funeral, didn't you, Janet?
Yes. Well, also, if you remember, it was because we'd lost Angus.
Yes.
Angus had disappeared and was meant to have been at Southampton
University. He's got a place at Southampton University,
which he just never came back to take up. And so there was a terrible scramble to try and see where the hell he'd got to.
The university kept ringing us up here in Appleby's saying, where is he? Is he going to take this place? He was still in Hong Kong.
No, he wasn't. I think he was in Crete.
Crete, but we left him in Hong Kong, and we went roaming anyway, all over the place.
That's another story.
Mm. And Dad, you have happy memories of Bude too, or?
Yes, what I liked about Bude was the views, and I used to go around all the churches, painting the churches.
But also the coast too is one.
And the coastline. I've got some of my paintings are of the coastline and all that. And I just loved going off for 2 or 3 hours in the car, sitting in a churchyard, just quietly sketching a church.
And you liked it so much you bought a property there?
Yes, well, we decided when we sold the cottage up in
yes, when we sold Upstone Road, we had
remember, the white
enough
cottage,
money to buy
the white cottage. We thought we might be able to with a mortgage, and we were down visiting my niece Vicky and John, and no, we were taking some American friends down there.
Yes, we had them from, yes, that's right.
And we took them to Stratton to show them the church and the old village of Bude, which of course is not Bude. Bude is a new town, well, it's a Victorian town, and Stratton is the ancient medieval and earlier centre, after which the Stratton 100 is called, that great Anglo-Saxon thing. And she said, oh, well, there's a cottage just up there that's just come up for sale. So we went to look at it and thought, whoopee, this is it, and bought it. And then eventually, about 6 or 7 years later, found we couldn't afford to keep it up. We couldn't keep the mortgage up. So we had to sell it, which was when Jamie bought his house, because he'd already loved Cornwall. And we'd taken Jamie as a very small boy, aged about 4 months old, down to Bude for a holiday after.
I don't know why we went to Bude via Dartmoor, but we were crossing Dartmoor with wild horses. And we looked back in the little car we were in, and there was Jamie standing up, holding on, and his nightgown blowing in the wind, and he was enjoying the view.
Yes, it was, with all the wild horses. But I must say that another time, Cornwall for a long time was the coast for me, and Bude and Rosemerrin. But later I spent 10 years, every year spending a week, exploring Bodmin Moor. And Bodmin Moor was where you and I went one day to climb Router, of which there's a picture in the next door Router. Do you remember that?
I do remember, yes.
And you were just getting to the top.
And we had to go back, unfortunately.
We had to go back, yes, it was just terrible.
It was So really, from the age of 8 till the age of 80s or something,
yes.
you've been up and down to Bude.
Yes.
And that's always been the place to go to when you felt...
Yes, it's my default home, you know. If you pick up a placard saying home, it tends to be
Rosemerrin.
Yeah.
Great.